Sarah Martinez clutched her worn thrift store blazer tighter as whispers echoed through the corporate lobby. "Look at those shoes," someone snickered. "Did she get dressed in the dark?" Another voice chimed in. The investment firm's annual gala was supposed to be her big break, but instead, she felt like a fraud surrounded by designer suits and diamond jewelry. Little did the mockers know, in exactly 47 minutes, their world would turn upside down when the most powerful aircraft on Earth would descend from the clouds, and its passengers would be looking for one person only, the woman they'd dismissed as a nobody. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the pristine marble floors of Henderson and Associates' 42nd floor. Sarah Martinez stepped out, her second-hand pump squeaking slightly against the polished surface. The navy blazer she'd found at Goodwill for $12 hung a bit too loose on her small frame, and the polyester blouse underneath had seen better days, but it was clean and pressed. She'd spent 2 hours the night before making sure every wrinkle was gone. The reception area buzzed with energy as Manhattan's financial elite mingled beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than Sarah's annual salary. Women glided past in Chanel and Hermes, their jewelry catching the light like scattered stars. Men adjusted their Armani cuffs and spoke in hushed tones about merger deals and market fluctuations. Sarah had never felt more out of place. "Excuse me, miss?" A security guard approached, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. "Are you here for the catering staff?" Heat crept up Sarah's neck. "No, I'm Sarah Martinez. I'm here for the gala. I work in the research department." The guard's expression shifted slightly, though not entirely convincing. "Right. Well, the main event is through those doors. Enjoy your evening." Sarah nodded and made her way toward the ballroom, passing clusters of conversations that seemed to pause as she walked by. She caught fragments of whispers trailing in her wake. "Who is that? Never seen her before. Look at that outfit." Someone should tell her this isn't a job interview from 1995. Victoria Ashworth, the firm's head of client relations, stood near the bar with 2 other senior executives. Her red Valentino dress probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, and the diamonds at her throat sparkled with each gesture she made. As Sarah passed, Victoria's laugh tinkled like an expensive crystal. "Oh my goodness, did you see her? That poor thing looks like she raided a church donation box." Victoria's voice carried just loud enough for Sarah to hear. "I mean, really, doesn't HR have some kind of dress code policy for these events?" James Wellington III, heir to a steel fortune and the firm's youngest VP, adjusted his Rolex and smirked. "Maybe she's someone's secretary who got lost. Should we call security again?" "Be nice, you two," chimed in Margaret Foster, though her tone suggested anything but kindness. "Not everyone can afford to look appropriate, though you'd think she'd at least try to fit in. This is supposed to be a professional gathering, not a soup kitchen." Sarah pretended not to hear, focusing instead on finding her assigned table. The seating chart directed her to table 12, tucked away in a corner near the service entrance. She wasn't surprised. As the newest and most junior member of the research team, she'd expected to be relegated to the background. What she hadn't expected was to feel quite so invisible. The chair beside her remained empty throughout the cocktail hour. Sarah sipped her water and watched as colleagues she'd worked alongside for 8 months walked past without acknowledgement. She'd spent countless late nights preparing market analysis reports that had earned the firm millions in successful trades. But here, surrounded by the people who'd benefited from her work, she might as well have been a ghost. Dr. Richard Pemberton, the firm's chief economist, took the stage as dinner was served. His silver hair gleamed under the spotlights as he launched into his annual address about market projections and the firm's record-breaking year. Sarah had written half of his speech, spending weeks researching emerging market trends and cryptocurrency. Fluctuations, but her name appeared nowhere in his acknowledgments. Of course, none of this would be possible without our exceptional team, Pemberton declared, gesturing broadly toward the audience. Our analysts work tirelessly to provide the insights that drive our success. Polite applause filled the room. Sarah clapped along, even as she noticed several colleagues turning in their seats to scan the crowd, their eyes passing over her as if she were part of the furniture. She'd grown accustomed to being overlooked in meetings, her suggestions often credited to others or dismissed entirely, only to be presented later by someone with more clout. The irony wasn't lost on her. 3 days earlier, she'd uncovered a pattern in Southeast Asian markets that would likely save the firm's largest client $30 million in bad investments. Her report sat on Pemberton's desk, her name in the corner in small print, while his signature dominated the cover page. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself gravitating toward quieter corners of the room. Near the coat check, she overheard 2 junior associates discussing their weekend plans in the Hamptons. By the windows overlooking the city, a group of traders debated the merits of various country clubs. She felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture, one she'd never truly be part of no matter how hard she worked or how valuable her contributions proved to be. "You know what I don't understand?" Victoria Ashworth's voice drifted over from the dessert table, where she stood with 3 other women from the marketing department. "How someone can work in finance and still dress like they shop at yard sales. I mean, image matters in this business. Clients need to see success, not whatever that is." Her companions giggled, their manicured fingers pointing discreetly in Sarah's direction. Sarah busied herself examining the silent auction items, pretending deep interest in a weekend getaway to Martha's Vineyard. That cost more than her monthly salary. The cruel comments weren't new. In the 8 months since she'd started at Henderson and Associates, Sarah had endured constant reminders of her outsider status. Her colleagues discussed restaurants she'd never heard of, vacation destinations that might as well have been on different planets, and cultural references that flew over her head. She'd grown up in a studio apartment in Queens with her grandmother, working 3 jobs to put herself through community college before transferring to finish her economics degree at night school. Every designer handbag in the room represented months of her salary. Every piece of jewelry could have covered her student loan payments for a year. But Sarah had something these people didn't understand. She'd earned every opportunity through merit alone, without connections or family money to smooth the path. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Sarah glanced down, expecting to see a message from her grandmother asking about the fancy party. Instead, she saw an unknown number with a simple message: "Package for Sarah Martinez. Building lobby. Urgent." Sarah frowned. She wasn't expecting any deliveries, especially not at her workplace during the evening. The message felt oddly formal, almost official. She excused herself from her empty table and made her way toward the elevators, grateful for an excuse to escape the suffocating atmosphere of artificial smiles and barely concealed disdain. The lobby was nearly empty except for the night security guard and a man in a dark suit standing near the reception desk. He looked up as Sarah approached, his posture suggesting military training or government service. "Miss Sarah Martinez." His voice was crisp, professional. "Yes, that's me. I got a message about a package." The man reached into his jacket and withdrew a thick envelope with an official-looking seal. "This is for you. Please read it carefully. Someone will be in touch very soon." Before Sarah could ask any questions, the man turned and walked briskly toward the exit, leaving her alone with the mysterious envelope. Her name was written across the front in elegant script, but there was no return address or indication of where it had come from. Sarah tore open the seal and unfolded a single sheet of heavy paper. The letterhead made her breath catch in her throat. It was from the office of the President of the United States. Her hands trembled as she read the words that would change everything. The letter was brief, formal, and utterly impossible. It was a request for her immediate consultation on a matter of national economic security, signed by someone whose signature she'd only seen on television and in textbooks. Sarah read the letter 3 times, certain she was hallucinating or that this was some elaborate prank. But the paper felt real beneath her fingers, the seal authentic, the language too formal and specific to be fake. According to the document, her recent analysis of emerging market vulnerabilities had caught the attention of the highest levels of government, and her expertise was needed for a classified briefing scheduled for tonight. The elevator chimed behind her, and Sarah quickly folded the letter, slipping it into her purse. Her mind raced as she tried to process what she'd just read. How had her work reached the White House? Why would the president need her specifically? And most importantly, was any of this actually real? She returned to the gala in a daze, the sounds of laughter and conversation seeming distant and muffled. The same people who'd spent the evening mocking her clothes and questioning her presence continued their conversations, oblivious to the bombshell Sarah carried in her second-hand purse. Victoria Ashworth was holding court near the bar, regaling her audience with a story about her recent shopping trip to Paris. And then I told the sales associate, "Darling, if you have to ask about the price, you probably shouldn't be shopping here. I mean, really, some people just don't understand luxury." Her friends erupted in laughter, their voices sharp and cruel. Sarah watched them from across the room. These people who'd made her feel small and insignificant for months, and felt something shift inside her. The letter in her purse felt like armor, protecting her from their petty cruelty. But even as she stood there, watching the very people who dismissed her continue their shallow conversations, Sarah couldn't quite believe what was happening. Part of her wondered if she'd misunderstood something, if the letter was meant for someone else, if this was all some terrible mistake that would be corrected before she made a fool of herself. The uncertainty gnawed at her as the evening wore on, mixing with a growing sense of anticipation that made her pulse quicken every time she thought about the impossible words on that government letterhead. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah's phone vibrated again at exactly 9:47 p.m. This time, the message came from a different number, but the tone was unmistakably official. Black sedan waiting outside. License plate Alpha-7-7-9. The driver will identify himself as Agent Thompson. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she glanced around the ballroom. The gala was reaching its peak, with most attendees deep into their 3rd or 4th cocktail. Dr. Pemberton was announcing the firm's charitable donations for the year, his voice booming over the sound system while slides displayed impressive dollar amounts on screens throughout the room. Sarah slipped away from her corner table and headed for the exit, her cheap heels clicking against the marble with a rhythm that seemed deafeningly loud in her ears. The elevator ride down felt eternal, her reflection staring back from the polished steel doors like a stranger. The woman looking back at her wore discount store clothes and carried a purse from Target, but her eyes held something new, a mixture of terror and exhilaration that she'd never seen before. The lobby's revolving door deposited her onto the sidewalk where Manhattan's evening energy pulsed around her. Yellow taxis honked their way through traffic, pedestrians hurried past with purposeful strides, and the city's neon signs painted everything in electric colors. But Sarah's attention focused entirely on the sleek black sedan idling at the curb. Its windows tinted so dark she couldn't see inside. A man in a navy suit approached her, his movements precise and economical. "Ms. Martinez, Agent Thompson, Secret Service. May I see some identification, please?" Sarah fumbled through her purse, her hands shaking as she produced her driver's license. Agent Thompson examined it with a small flashlight, comparing her face to the photo with professional thoroughness. "Thank you. Please, step into the vehicle." The sedan's interior was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The leather seats were buttersoft, the air conditioning perfectly calibrated, and a subtle partition separated the back seat from the driver's compartment. Agent Thompson settled beside her as the vehicle pulled smoothly into traffic. "Ma'am, I need to inform you that you'll be subject to security screening upon arrival. This is standard protocol for all civilian consultants. Do you have any questions about the process?" Sarah's mouth felt dry. "I still don't understand how this is happening. My work, I mean. How did it reach? How did anyone even know about it?" Agent Thompson's expression remained neutral. "That's outside my area of expertise, ma'am. What I can tell you is that your analysis triggered several automated monitoring systems that flagged potential economic threats. Your projections regarding the Southeast Asian currency fluctuations aligned with intelligence we'd gathered from other sources." The sedan moved through Manhattan with surprising speed, taking routes Sarah didn't recognize. They passed through tunnels and along highways that seemed to bypass normal traffic entirely. Through the windows, she watched the city lights blur into streams of color. "Agent Thompson, where exactly are we going?" "Temporary secure facility, ma'am. The briefing location changes depending on operational requirements." 23 minutes. Later, they pulled into what appeared to be a private airfield. Sarah had never seen anything like it. Hangars stretching into the darkness, aircraft that looked more like science fiction than reality, and personnel moving with military precision across the tarmac. Floodlights illuminated everything in harsh white light, creating stark shadows that made the scene feel surreal. Agent Thompson escorted her to a nondescript building, where she underwent the most thorough security screening of her life. Metal detectors, background verification, and questions about everything from her childhood pets to her college professors. The agents were polite but relentless, their efficiency suggesting this was routine, despite feeling extraordinary to Sarah. Finally, she was led to a conference room that looked like something from a spy movie. Multiple screens lined the walls, displaying real-time data feeds from markets around the world. Charts showed currency fluctuations, commodity prices, and trading volumes in colors that shifted and moved like living things. At the center of it all sat a mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than her car. 3 people were already seated when Sarah entered. A woman in her 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes introduced herself as Director Patricia Hawkins from the Treasury Department. Beside her sat a younger man whose credentials identified him as Dr. Marcus Chen, Senior Economic Advisor to the National Security Council. The third person, a stern-faced man in military dress uniform, was introduced simply as General Rodriguez. "Ms. Martinez, please have a seat." Director Hawkins gestured to the chair across from them. "We apologize for the unusual circumstances, but time is of the essence. Your recent analysis of emerging market vulnerabilities has identified something our teams missed." Sarah sat down carefully, acutely aware of how out of place she must look in her thrift store outfit, surrounded by these obviously powerful people. "I'm still not sure I understand. My report was just routine market analysis for my firm." Dr. Chun leaned forward, his expression intense. "Your routine analysis identified a pattern that suggests coordinated market manipulation on a scale we've never seen before. The currency fluctuations you flagged aren't random market forces. They're deliberate attacks designed to destabilize multiple economies simultaneously." General Rodriguez opened a folder and slid several documents across the table. "What you identified as market trends, we now believe to be the preliminary phases of economic warfare. Someone is testing our response capabilities, probing for weaknesses in the global financial system." Sarah stared at the documents, her mind reeling. The charts and graphs looked familiar. They were variations of the same data she'd been analyzing for weeks. But the context these people were providing transformed everything she thought she understood about her work. The sophistication required. For this type of operation suggests state-level resources, Director Hawkins continued. We're talking about billions of dollars in coordinated trades, artificial intelligence systems capable of predicting market responses, and access to information. That should be classified. Your analysis didn't just identify the pattern, it predicted the next phase. Dr. Chun activated one of the wall screens, displaying Sarah's original report alongside additional data she'd never seen. According to your projections, the next wave of attack should target European markets, specifically focusing on energy sector vulnerabilities. Our intelligence suggests that timeline has been accelerated. Sarah studied the screen, her analytical mind automatically processing the new information. Despite her overwhelming confusion about how she'd ended up in this room, the data fascinated her. Patterns emerged that she hadn't seen before, connections between seemingly unrelated market movements that painted a picture of something massive and coordinated. If your projections are correct, General Rodriguez said, we're looking at potential economic damage in the trillions. Pension funds wiped out, currencies destabilized, international trade relationships destroyed. The social and political consequences could be catastrophic. But I don't understand, Sarah said, finding her voice. Why me? Surely you have teams of analysts, people with security clearances and decades of experience. I'm just a junior researcher at an investment firm. Director Hawkins smiled for the first time since Sarah had entered the room. Ms. Martinez, sometimes fresh eyes see what experienced ones miss. Your background in game theory, combined with your unconventional approach to pattern recognition, allowed you to identify something our traditional analysts overlooked. You weren't constrained by assumptions about how these attacks should look. Dr. Chun nodded. Plus, your work history shows you've consistently identified market anomalies that others missed. The cryptocurrency analysis you did last year, the commodities report that predicted the agricultural sector disruption. These weren't lucky guesses. You have an intuitive understanding of complex systems that can't be taught. Sarah felt a strange mix of pride and terror. These people were talking about her work with a respect she'd never experienced, but the implications of what they were saying made her head spin. Economic warfare, coordinated attacks, trillions in potential damage, it all seemed impossible. What exactly do you need from me? She asked. General Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. We need you to help us understand their next move. Your original analysis predicted the European phase, but we need more detail. Specific targets, timing, the mechanism they'll use to execute the attacks. Most importantly, we need to know how to stop them. Director Hawkins activated another screen, this one showing real-time market data from Asia and Europe. The attacks began 3 hours ago, exactly as your report predicted. Currency values are already fluctuating outside normal parameters. We estimate we have maybe 18 hours before the damage becomes irreversible. Sarah stared at the scrolling numbers, watching millions of dollars vanish and reappear with each market tick. Somewhere in those fluctuations were the livelihoods of ordinary people, retirement accounts and college funds, and small business loans. The abstract numbers represented real human consequences. I'll need access to more data, she heard herself saying. Trading volume analysis going back at least 6 months, cross-referenced with geopolitical events and currency interventions. And I'll need to see the artificial intelligence models they're likely using. Someone this sophisticated won't be relying on human traders alone. Dr. Chun smiled. We were hoping you'd say that. We've prepared a complete data package including some information that usually requires decades of security clearance to access. Under normal circumstances, this would be impossible. But these aren't normal circumstances. Agent Thompson reappeared at the conference room door. Ma'am, we're ready for transport to the primary facility. Sarah looked around the room at these People who had summoned her from obscurity to help solve what sounded like an international crisis. Just hours ago, she'd been enduring whispered insults about her second-hand clothes. Now she was being asked to help prevent economic collapse. The primary facility? She asked. Director Hawkins stood, gathering her papers. Ms. Martinez, we're going to Washington. There's someone who very much wants to meet with you personally. As they prepared to leave, Sarah caught her reflection in the conference rooms. Darkened windows. She still looked exactly the same discount store blazer, the same worn shoes, the same uncertain expression, but something fundamental had shifted. The woman staring back at her was no longer invisible. The ride to the aircraft was a blur of security protocols and briefing documents. Sarah found herself seated aboard what Agent Thompson described as a government transport, though it looked more luxurious than any commercial flight she'd ever imagined. The cabin was configured like a flying office, with workstations and communication equipment that allowed her to begin analyzing data, even before takeoff. As the plane lifted off from the airfield, Manhattan spread out below them like a circuit board, its lights forming patterns that suddenly reminded Sarah of the market data she'd been studying. Everything was connected, she realized. The economic systems she analyzed were just as complex and interconnected as the city disappearing beneath them. Director Hawkins settled into the seat across from her. Ms. Martinez, I want you to understand something. What's happening tonight, what you've helped us discover, is going to change how we think about economic security. Your work won't go unrecognized. Sarah nodded, though she was still processing everything that had happened. Director Hawkins, can I ask you something? How long have you known about me? About my work? Longer than you might think, the director replied. The Treasury Department monitors economic research from various sources. Your name has come up before, though never in circumstances like these. You have a gift for seeing patterns that others miss. Tonight, that gift might help save the global economy. As the aircraft climbed toward cruising altitude, Sarah opened the first of several classified briefing folders. The data inside was staggering in its scope and detail. Market intelligence gathered from sources around the world, analyses prepared by teams she'd never heard of, and projections that made her own work look elementary by comparison. But as she studied the documents, she began to see familiar patterns. The same mathematical relationships she'd identified in her original report were reflected in this much larger dataset, but amplified and accelerated. Whoever was orchestrating these attacks had moved faster than anyone expected. Sarah lost herself in the numbers, her mind automatically sorting and analyzing the information. She barely noticed when Agent Thompson appeared with coffee, or when Dr. Chun sat down beside her to discuss technical details. The flight to Washington passed in a blur of calculations and hypotheses. It wasn't until the aircraft began its descent that Sarah looked up from her work and realized what was about to happen. In a few minutes, she would be meeting with people at the highest levels of government, people who would be depending on her analysis to make decisions that could affect millions of lives. The irony struck her as she gathered her papers. This morning, she'd been worried about fitting in at a corporate gala. Tonight, she was about to brief officials on a potential economic catastrophe. The same analytical skills that her colleagues at Henderson and Associates had dismissed as unremarkable were now being called upon to help protect the global financial system. As the aircraft touched down at what Agent Thompson identified as a secure government facility, Sarah took a deep breath and prepared for whatever came next. Through the small aircraft window, she could see a convoy of vehicles waiting on the tarmac, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Whatever happened in the next few hours, she knew her life had changed forever. The quiet researcher who'd been invisible at tonight's gala was about to step into a world she'd never imagined existed. The convoy moved through Washington's empty streets with military precision. Sarah pressed her face to the bulletproof window, watching familiar monuments pass by in the pre-dawn gloom. The Lincoln Memorial stood illuminated against the dark sky, its marble columns ghostly white in the floodlights. She'd visited these landmarks as a tourist once during college, never imagining she'd return under such extraordinary circumstances. Agent Thompson sat beside her in the lead vehicle, speaking quietly into a secure radio. His conversations were filled with code words and acronyms Sarah didn't recognize, but the urgency in his voice was unmistakable. Behind them, 3 additional vehicles maintained perfect formation, their occupants invisible behind tinted glass. ETA 2 minutes to Checkpoint Alpha, Thompson reported. The package is secure and ready for transfer. Sarah assumed she was the package in question. The clinical terminology should have been unsettling, but instead she found it oddly reassuring. These people treated her protection with the same professional seriousness they'd bring to guarding a head of state. The convoy turned onto Pennsylvania Avenue, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Even in darkness, the White House was unmistakable, its neoclassical facade glowing under security lights. Iron gates and concrete barriers surrounded the complex, while uniformed Secret Service agents maintained visible positions at regular intervals, but they didn't stop at the main entrance. Instead, the convoy continued past the public areas, turning into a secured loading area she'd never seen in any photographs or television coverage. Massive steel doors slid open to admit their vehicles, then closed behind them with a finality that made Sarah's ears pop. The underground facility beyond those doors was like nothing she could have imagined. Pristine white corridors stretched in multiple directions, lined with doors that bore only numbers and security warnings. Personnel moved through the hallways with purposeful efficiency, their footsteps echoing off polished floors. Everything smelled of disinfectant and new electronics. Ms. Martinez, Agent Thompson guided her toward an elevator bank. You'll be escorted to a secure briefing room where additional team members are waiting. The principals will join you shortly. The elevator descended farther than Sarah expected, passing floors marked with letters rather than numbers. When the doors finally opened, she found herself in what could only be described as a command center. Dozens of workstations filled a cavernous space, their multiple monitors displaying everything from satellite imagery to stock market data. The walls were lined with screens showing news feeds from around the world, all muted but captioned in real time. Director Hawkins appeared at Sarah's elbow, her earlier composure replaced by visible tension. The situation has accelerated since we left New York. European markets opened 20 minutes ago, and we're seeing exactly the pattern your analysis predicted. Currency values are dropping faster than our models suggested possible. She led Sarah to a central workstation where Dr. Chun was coordinating with what appeared to be teams of analysts scattered across the globe. Video conference windows showed faces from London, Tokyo, Frankfurt, and cities Sarah couldn't identify. Each screen displayed urgent conversations conducted in multiple languages. The attack is more sophisticated than we initially believed, Dr. Chen explained without looking up from his monitors. They're using high-frequency trading algorithms that adapt in real time, countering every intervention we attempt. It's like fighting an opponent who can predict our moves before we make them. Sarah studied the data streaming across the screens around her. The numbers told a story of coordinated chaos, massive sell orders executing simultaneously across multiple markets, currency trades that made no economic sense unless viewed as weapons rather than investments. The scale was breathtaking and terrifying. How much damage so far? She asked. General Rodriguez appeared behind them, his uniform now bearing additional insignia Sarah hadn't noticed before. Conservative estimates put losses at $400 billion globally, and that's just in the first hour. If this continues at the current pace, we're looking at complete destabilization of the international banking system within 12 hours. The general activated a large wall display that showed a real-time map of the world's major financial centers. Red indicators pulsed at locations where attacks were active, while yellow markers showed markets that appeared to be next in line. The pattern was clearly deliberate, designed to create maximum psychological impact by targeting the most visible and influential trading centers. The psychological component is almost as dangerous as the direct economic damage, Director Hawkins added. When traders see this level of coordinated activity, panic selling becomes inevitable. Fear multiplies the actual damage exponentially. Sarah absorbed this information while her analytical mind automatically began processing the attack patterns. The mathematical elegance of the assault was actually quite beautiful, if you could ignore the human consequences. Whoever had designed this understood not just economics, but psychology, game theory, and international relations. Have you identified who's behind it? She asked. Dr. Chun and General Rodriguez exchanged glances. That's complicated, the general said finally. The digital fingerprints suggest multiple state actors, but the coordination level implies a single controlling intelligence. We're dealing with something unprecedented. Agent Thompson approached their group, speaking quietly to Director Hawkins. Before turning to Sarah, "Ma'am, it's time. Please follow me." They left the command center through a different corridor. This one carpeted and lined with historical portraits Sarah recognized from textbooks. The atmosphere here felt more formal, more ceremonial than the utilitarian spaces they'd passed through earlier. Their footsteps were muffled by thick carpet, and the air carried a subtle scent of leather and old wood. Sarah found herself in an anteroom, decorated with furniture that looked both priceless and comfortable. A grandfather clock ticked in one corner, its rhythm steady and calming. Through tall windows, she could see the first hints of dawn beginning to lighten the eastern sky. "Ms. Martinez," Agent Thompson said, "in a moment you'll be meeting with individuals at the highest levels of government. The conversation will be classified at the highest levels. Do you understand the implications of that?" Sarah nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure she did understand. Everything about the last few hours had been surreal, each revelation more impossible than the last. She felt like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole, except the wonderland she'd found was filled with economic warfare and national security briefings. A door she hadn't noticed opened silently, and Agent Thompson gestured for her to enter. The room beyond was smaller than she'd expected, dominated by a polished conference table surrounded by chairs that looked both elegant and practical. Historical paintings lined the walls, and the lighting was warm and comfortable despite the early hour. 5 people were already seated at the table. Sarah recognized Director Hawkins and Dr. Chen, but the other 3 were new faces. A woman in her 60s with perfectly styled gray hair sat at the head of the table, her presence commanding, even in silence. Beside her, 2 men in expensive suits studied tablets displaying what appeared to be real-time market data. Ms. Martinez, the woman at the head of the table, stood and extended her hand. "Thank you for coming. I'm Secretary of the Treasury Janet Morrison. We've been following your work with great interest." Sarah shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. Secretary Morrison's presence filled the room in a way that made everyone else seem secondary, despite their obvious importance. "Please sit." Secretary Morrison gestured to a chair directly across from her. "I want you to understand that what we're about to discuss has implications for national security that extend far beyond economics. Your analysis has identified something that threatens the stability of the global financial system." One of the men beside her leaned forward. "Ms. Martinez, I'm Deputy Director Collins from the National Security Agency. The attack patterns you identified aren't just targeting markets, they're probing the fundamental infrastructure that supports international trade. If successful, this could collapse the economic relationships that have maintained global stability for decades." The second man introduced himself as Admiral Peterson from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. From a military perspective, this represents a new form of warfare. Traditional conflicts involve armies and weapons. This attack uses mathematics and algorithms as weapons, targeting civilian populations through their economic security. Sarah found her voice despite her intimidation. Secretary Morrison, I need to ask, how did my analysis reach this level? I'm a junior researcher at a private firm. Surely you have teams of analysts with decades more experience. Secretary Morrison smiled, the expression both warm and calculating. Ms. Martinez, sometimes the most important insights come from unexpected sources. Your background gives you perspectives our traditional analysts lack. You see patterns because you're not constrained by assumptions about how economic warfare should look. Dr. Chun activated a screen behind Secretary Morrison, displaying Sarah's original report alongside additional data she'd never seen. Your analysis didn't just identify the attack pattern, it predicted the psychological component we're seeing now. The timing, the target selection, the escalation schedule, everything is happening exactly as your model suggested. Deputy Director Collins leaned back in his chair. The intelligence community has been tracking economic anomalies for months, but we interpreted them as separate incidents. Your work was the key that helped us understand we were looking at a coordinated campaign. Admiral Peterson opened a classified folder. Ms. Martinez, we need your help to understand their endgame. The current attacks are devastating, but our analysts believe they're preliminary. We think someone is testing our response capabilities before launching something even more destructive. Sarah studied the new data on the screen, her mind automatically processing the information. The patterns were clearer now, with access to intelligence sources she'd never imagined existed. The mathematical relationships she'd identified in her original analysis were just the tip of an iceberg that extended far deeper than she'd realized. The artificial intelligence systems they're using are incredibly sophisticated, she said, thinking aloud. The adaptation speed suggests machine learning capabilities that are probably years ahead of anything publicly available. But the psychological targeting shows human insight. Someone understands how fear spreads through markets. Secretary Morrison nodded. That's exactly the kind of analysis we need. The combination of artificial intelligence and human strategic thinking makes this unlike anything we've faced before. Agent Thompson appeared at the conference room door, speaking quietly to one of the other agents present. Whatever he said caused immediate activity around the table, with several people checking their phones and tablets simultaneously. What is it? Secretary Morrison asked. Agent Thompson's expression was carefully neutral. Ma'am, we've just received word that the President has decided to return from Camp David immediately. Air Force One is being prepared for departure. ETA. Here is approximately 45 minutes. The room fell silent. Sarah felt her heart rate accelerate as the implications of Agent Thompson's announcement sank in. She was about to meet the President of the United States. The same person whose signature she'd seen on the letter that had started this incredible night. Secretary Morrison turned to Sarah. Ms. Martinez, in about an hour, you're going to brief the President on a potential economic catastrophe. Are you ready for that responsibility? Sarah looked around the table at these powerful people who were placing their trust in her analysis. Just 12 hours ago, she'd been worried about fitting in at a corporate gala. Now she was being asked to help prevent what could be the greatest economic disaster in modern history. Secretary Morrison, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice, I'll need access to real-time trading data from all major markets, intelligence assessments on the artificial intelligence systems being used, and communication intercepts from the entities coordinating these attacks. If I'm going to brief the President, I want to make sure I have the complete picture. Secretary Morrison smiled, the expression showing both approval and relief. Dr. Chun, Please ensure Ms. Martinez has everything she needs. And get her access to the quantum analysis systems. If we're dealing with a AI this sophisticated, we need to fight fire with fire." As the meeting broke up and people began preparing for the president's arrival, Sarah felt a strange calm settling over her. The magnitude of the situation should have been overwhelming, but instead she found herself focusing on the data, the patterns, the mathematical relationships that made sense even when everything else seemed impossible. Agent Thompson approached as she was reviewing additional classified documents. "Ma'am, there's one more thing you should know. The president specifically requested this meeting after reading your analysis personally. This isn't just a routine briefing. You've gotten the attention of the most powerful person in the world." Through the conference room windows, Sarah could see dawn breaking over Washington. The city was waking up to what would likely be remembered as one of the most dangerous days in economic history. Somewhere out there, the same colleagues who had mocked her cheap clothes were probably just getting home from the gala, completely unaware that the quiet woman they'd dismissed was about to help determine the fate of the global economy. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. But as Sarah prepared her presentation for the president, she realized that this was exactly where she belonged, not because of her clothes or her connections, but because of her mind and her ability to see patterns that others missed. In less than an hour, Air Force One would land, and Sarah Martinez would step into a role she'd never imagined possible. The quantum analysis systems were unlike anything Sarah had ever imagined. Located 3 floors beneath the White House, the computing center hummed with the sound of cooling systems, working overtime to maintain optimal temperatures for processors that operated at the edge of what was technologically possible. Dr. Chun led her through a maze of servers and workstations, each one dedicated to analyzing different aspects of the ongoing economic attack. These systems can process market data at speeds that would have been science fiction just 5 years ago. Dr. Chun explained as they approached a workstation configured specifically for her use. "The AI we're fighting is fast, but this gives us a chance to keep up." Sarah settled into the ergonomic chair and began interfacing with systems that responded to her thoughts almost as quickly as she could form them. The data visualization capabilities were stunning. Complex mathematical relationships appeared as 3-dimensional structures she could manipulate with gesture controls, revealing patterns that would have taken hours to identify using traditional methods. Within minutes, she was deep in analysis that made her previous work look elementary. The quantum systems allowed her to model the attacker's artificial intelligence directly, creating virtual representations of their decision-making processes. What she discovered made her blood run cold. "Dr. Chun, you need to see this," she called out, her voice tight with concern. He hurried over as Sarah displayed her findings on the main wall screen. The attack wasn't just sophisticated, it was learning and adapting faster than anyone had realized. The AI systems coordinating the assault were analyzing their targets' responses in real time, adjusting strategies to maximize damage with each market intervention they encountered. "It's like fighting an opponent who gets smarter with every move we make," Sarah explained, highlighting specific data points. "Every time we try to stabilize a currency or support a market, their systems learn from our response and develop countermeasures. We're not just losing, we're teaching them how to beat us more effectively." Dr. Chun's face went pale as he processed the implications. How long before they achieve complete market dominance? Sarah ran additional calculations, the quantum processors delivering results in seconds that would have taken conventional computers hours to produce. At the current learning rate, maybe 6 hours. After that, they'll be able to predict and counter any intervention we attempt. The economic damage will become irreversible. General Rodriguez appeared beside them, having been monitoring their work from across the command center. "Ms. Martinez, are you saying we're facing an artificial intelligence that's actively evolving during the attack?" "Not just evolving, It's using our own defensive measures as training data to become more effective. Every time we try to help, we're actually making the problem worse. Sarah manipulated the display to show the learning pattern she'd identified. This isn't just economic warfare. It's a form of artificial intelligence that feeds on conflict. The general's expression grew grim. Can we cut off its learning capability? Deny it access to the data it needs to adapt? Sarah shook her head. The system is distributed across multiple networks, probably spanning several countries. It's not a single entity we can target. It's more like a digital organism that exists in the spaces between different computer systems. Cutting off one part would just make the others adapt faster. Agent Thompson's voice echoed through the command center's intercom system. Air Force One is on final approach. All senior personnel to positions for presidential arrival. The activity level in the room intensified immediately. Personnel began securing workstations and organizing briefing materials with military precision. Sarah found herself swept along in the organized chaos, still clutching the tablet containing her analysis as they moved toward the elevators. The main floor of the White House felt different during a crisis. The usual tourist-friendly atmosphere had been replaced by something more focused and urgent. Staff members moved through corridors with purpose, speaking in hushed tones into secure phones. The historical portraits lining the walls seemed to watch over everything with expressions of dignified concern. Secretary Morrison appeared at Sarah's side as they waited in the Roosevelt room. Ms. Martinez, you're about to brief the president on what may be the most serious economic threat in our nation's history. I want you to remember that your analysis brought us this far. Trust your expertise. Through the room's windows, Sarah could see the South Lawn where Marine One would land to transport the president from Andrews Air Force Base. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine grass, and Secret Service agents maintained positions at strategic points around the landing zone. The distinctive sound of helicopter rotors grew louder, and within minutes, Marine One appeared over the tree line. The aircraft settled onto the lawn with practiced precision, its rotors creating a whirlwind that bent the grass and scattered loose leaves. Secret Service agents immediately formed a protective perimeter as the aircraft's door opened. Sarah held her breath as the President of the United States emerged from the helicopter. Even at a distance, the figure commanded attention in a way that transcended television coverage or newspaper photographs. This was the person whose decisions could affect billions of lives, whose signature had set the events of this extraordinary night into motion. The presidential party moved quickly toward the White House, disappearing from view as they entered. Through the diplomatic reception room, within minutes, Agent Thompson appeared to escort Sarah and the other briefing participants to the Oval Office. The walk through the West Wing felt surreal. Sarah passed offices she'd seen in countless movies and television shows, but experiencing them in person was entirely different. The carpet beneath her second-hand shoes had been walked on by presidents and prime ministers, kings and Nobel laureates. The walls had witnessed conversations that shaped world history. Agent Thompson paused outside the Oval Office. Ms. Martinez, when you enter, the president will be seated behind the resolute desk. Wait to be introduced. Then take the chair directly across from the desk. Speak clearly and directly. The president appreciates concise analysis. The door opened, and Sarah stepped into the most famous office in the world. The Oval Office was smaller than she'd expected, but radiated power in every detail. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows behind the resolute desk, creating an almost ethereal glow around the figure seated there. President Elizabeth Harper looked up as Sarah entered, her expression serious but welcoming. She was younger than Sarah had expected, perhaps in her early 50s, with intelligent eyes that seemed to assess everything simultaneously. Her presence filled the room despite her relatively small stature. Ms. Martinez, please sit. President Harper gestured to the chair across from her desk. I've been reading your analysis during the flight from Camp David. Your work has identified something that threatens the economic security of every American family. Sarah took the offered seat, acutely aware that she was probably the first person ever to sit in that chair wearing clothes from a thrift store. But as she met the president's gaze, she realized that her background didn't matter here. What mattered was what she knew and how that knowledge could help protect the country. Madam President, the situation is more serious than our initial report suggested. The AI coordinating these attacks is learning from our defensive responses, becoming more effective with each intervention we attempt. President Harper leaned forward, her full attention focused on Sarah's words. Explain what that means in practical terms. Sarah activated a tablet that displayed her latest analysis. Every time we try to stabilize a currency or support a market, their systems study our methods and develop better countermeasures. We're essentially training an artificial intelligence to be more effective at economic warfare. Within 6 hours, it will be sophisticated enough to predict and counter any response we can mount. And the consequences if we can't stop it? Complete destabilization of the global financial system, Madam President. Bank failures, currency collapses, international trade disruption on a scale that would make the 2008 crisis look minor by comparison. We're talking about economic damage that could take decades to repair. President Harper was silent for several moments, processing the implications. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of ultimate responsibility. Ms. Martinez, what do you recommend? Sarah had been preparing for this question during the helicopter ride and the quantum analysis session. We can't fight this AI directly, it's too distributed and adaptive. But we might be able to confuse it by feeding it false data, creating phantom market conditions that cause it to make incorrect predictions. How would that work? We coordinate with allied governments to create artificial market movements that look real but are actually controlled simulations. The AI tries to learn from these false patterns, but instead of becoming more effective, it becomes more confused. Eventually, its predictive capabilities degrade to the point where we can implement effective countermeasures. President Harper studied the data on Sarah's tablet. What are the risks of this approach? If we're wrong about the AI's learning patterns, we could make the situation worse. And the coordination required between multiple governments would be unprecedented. Any mistakes or leaks could trigger the exact market panic we're trying to prevent. Secretary Morrison spoke up from her position beside the president's desk. Madam President, the alternative is accepting economic collapse. Ms. Martinez's approach represents our best chance of success. President Harper stood and walked to the windows overlooking the rose garden. For several moments, she stared out at the peaceful scene, probably considering decisions that would affect millions of lives. When she turned back to face the room, her expression was resolute. Ms. Martinez, I'm authorizing your proposed countermeasures. Secretary Morrison, coordinate with our allies immediately. We need the European Union, Japan, and the UK implementing coordinated market interventions within the hour. Yes, Madam President. President Harper returned to her desk and picked up a secure phone. General Rodriguez, this is the President. Implement Countermeasure Protocol 7 immediately. Dr. Chun, I want real-time updates on the AI's response. Patterns every 15 minutes. Sarah watched as the most powerful person in the world acted on her recommendations. The surreal nature of the situation hit her again, less than 12 hours ago. She'd been enduring whispered insults at a corporate gala. Now her analysis was driving decisions at the highest levels of government. Ms. Martinez, President. Harper said as she ended her phone calls, I want you to personally oversee the implementation of these countermeasures. You understand this AI better than anyone else. Stay in the command center and monitor its responses. If your approach works, you'll have helped prevent the greatest economic catastrophe in modern history. Agent Thompson appeared to escort Sarah back to the command center, but President Harper held up a hand. "One more moment, Ms. Martinez. I want you to understand something. Your background, your education, where you shop for clothes, none of that matters here. What matters is your ability to see patterns others miss, and your courage to act on dangerous insights. Today, those qualities make you one of the most important people in this room." As Sarah left the Oval Office, she carried with her words she'd never expected to hear from anyone, let alone the President of the United States. The command center was buzzing with activity when she returned, with teams coordinating complex operations across multiple time zones and continents. Dr. Chin met her at the Quantum Analysis Workstation. "European markets are implementing the phantom trading patterns you designed. Initial results show the AI is beginning to respond, trying to learn from the false data." Sarah settled back into her workstation, her fingers flying across the quantum interface as she monitored the artificial intelligence's responses in real time. The next few hours would determine whether her theoretical understanding of adaptive AI systems could be translated into practical countermeasures against the most sophisticated economic attack in history. On screens around the command center, she could see the early results of their coordinated deception. Market indicators that looked completely realistic to human observers were confusing the attacking AI, causing it to make predictions based on false assumptions. For the first time since the crisis began, they weren't just reacting to the attack. They were actively fighting back, but Sarah knew the real test was still to come. The AI would eventually recognize that it was being fed false data and adapt accordingly. The window for their countermeasures was closing rapidly, and everything depended on whether they could exploit the artificial intelligence's learning patterns before it became too sophisticated to deceive. As she worked to save the global economy. From her workstation beneath the White House, Sarah couldn't help but think about her colleagues at Henderson and Associates. They were probably just arriving at work, completely unaware that the woman they'd mocked for her cheap clothes was now coordinating international economic policy at the highest levels of government. The irony was perfect, but Sarah no longer had time to dwell on it. The fate of the global financial system hung in the balance, and she was the only person who truly understood how to fight back against an enemy that existed purely in the realm of mathematics and code. The Quantum Analysis Workstation hummed with data as Sarah watched the artificial intelligence begin to unravel. For 27 minutes, the coordinated deception had been working perfectly. The AI was consuming false market data from 17 different countries, its learning algorithms incorporating phantom trading patterns that looked legitimate, but led to increasingly inaccurate predictions. "Pattern deviation is accelerating," Dr. Chung reported from his station across the command center. "The AI's confidence metrics are dropping by 12% every cycle as it tries to reconcile conflicting data streams." Sarah studied the three-dimensional visualization floating before her, watching as the AI's decision tree began to fragment. Each false data point they fed it created branches in its logic that led nowhere, forcing it to allocate processing power to analyze patterns that didn't actually exist. It was like watching a chess grandmaster slowly realize the board had been switched while they weren't looking. European Central Bank reports successful phantom currency stabilization, General Rodriguez announced from the communication hub. The AI attempted to counter their intervention with a coordinated attack on the euro, but its predictions were off by 43%. It's losing its ability to anticipate market responses. Secretary Morrison appeared beside Sarah's workstation, her earlier tension replaced by cautious optimism. "How much longer before we've completely disrupted its learning capabilities?" Sarah manipulated the quantum interface, running projection models that calculated the AI's degradation rate across multiple variables. At current deception levels, maybe 90 more minutes. But there's a risk it might recognize what's happening and attempt a final massive attack before we can fully neutralize it. As if summoned by her words, Alarms began sounding throughout the command center. Red indicators flashed on screens around the room as automated systems detected anomalous activity across global markets. "It's adapting faster than we expected," Dr. Chun called out, his voice tight with concern. "The AI just initiated simultaneous attacks on 14 different currency markets. It's trying to create so much chaos that our deception becomes irrelevant." Sarah's fingers flew across the quantum controls, analyzing the new attack patterns in real time. The eye had recognized that it was being fed false data, but instead of trying to filter truth from fiction, it was attempting to create conditions where accurate prediction became impossible for anyone, human or artificial. "It's implementing a scorched earth strategy," she realized aloud. "If it can't win, it's going to make sure nobody can control the markets at all. Complete economic chaos where traditional intervention becomes meaningless." The wall displays showed the devastating effectiveness of this new approach. Currency values fluctuated wildly as the AI executed trades designed not to profit, but to destroy predictability itself. Stock markets began crashing in sequence as automated trading systems, confused by the artificial volatility, began selling everything without discrimination. "Damage assessment," Secretary Morrison demanded. "2 trillion in losses and accelerating," General Rodriguez reported grimly. "At this rate, we're looking at complete financial system collapse within the hour." Sarah stared at the chaos unfolding across dozens of screens, her mind racing through possibilities. The AI had evolved beyond their ability to deceive it, but its new strategy revealed something important. It was no longer trying to learn from market patterns. It was simply trying to destroy them entirely. "I have an idea," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the urgent conversations filling the command center. "But it's incredibly risky." Secretary Morrison turned to face her. "More risky than global economic collapse?" "We stop trying to deceive the AI and instead give it exactly what it wants: perfect information about every market intervention. We're planning." Sarah's fingers moved across the quantum interface, pulling up models she'd been developing during the crisis. "We broadcast our strategies in real time, making our responses completely predictable." Dr. Chun looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. "That would let it counter every move we make with perfect accuracy." "Exactly. But here's the thing. If the AI can predict our responses perfectly, it will stop trying to create chaos and return to its original learning behavior. It will start making economically rational decisions again, because it won't need to destroy predictability to maintain control." General Rodriguez frowned. "You're suggesting we surrender our strategic advantage to make the AI behave more reasonably?" "I'm suggesting we exploit the fundamental flaw in its programming," Sarah explained, her excitement growing as the mathematical elegance of the solution became clear. "This AI was designed to learn from market patterns and optimize for success. The chaos strategy is contrary to its core programming. It's only using it because we forced it into a corner with our deception." She activated the main wall display, showing a complex algorithmic model that illustrated her reasoning. "If we give it perfect information about our interventions, it will return to its original behavior pattern. But here's the key: we can design our interventions specifically to teach behaviors that stabilize markets rather than destabilize them." Secretary Morrison studied the model intently. "You're talking about training an artificial intelligence that's been attacking us too. Become our ally instead." "Not an ally, more like a sophisticated market stabilization system. We use its learning capabilities against its destructive programming by making cooperation more successful than conflict." The alarms continued blaring as market conditions deteriorated further. Whatever they decided to do, it had to happen quickly before the damage became irreversible. "Madam Secretary," Agent Thompson's voice came through the intercom, "the President is requesting an immediate status update. Secretary Morrison activated her secure communication device. "Madam President, we have a potential solution, but it requires us to share our strategic information with the attacking AI in real time. Ms. Martinez believes this will cause it to abandon its chaos strategy and return to behavior we can influence constructively." President Harper's response was immediate. "What's the probability of success probability?" Sarah leaned toward the communication device. "Madam President, based on the AI's demonstrated learning patterns, I estimate an 87% chance of success. But if I'm wrong, we'll have given our opponent every advantage it needs to complete the economic destruction we're trying to prevent." Several seconds of silence followed before President Harper's voice returned. "Ms. Martinez, you've been right about everything so far. I'm authorizing your approach. Implement it immediately." Sarah felt the weight of that decision settle over the entire command center. Every person in the room understood that the next hour would either see the most innovative solution to economic warfare in history, or the completion of the most devastating financial collapse ever recorded. "Dr. Chun, I need you to establish open data channels with the AI's primary nodes," Sarah directed, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. "Broadcast our complete market intervention schedule, including timing, methodology, and expected outcomes." "That goes against every principle of strategic operations," General Rodriguez objected. "General, conventional strategic principles don't apply when fighting an opponent that learns from conflict," Sarah replied, her attention already focused on configuring the quantum systems for their unprecedented gamble. "We're not trying to defeat this AI. We're trying to redirect its learning toward outcomes that benefit everyone." The next several minutes were filled with frantic activity as teams throughout the command center implemented Sarah's strategy. Data channels opened between secure government systems and the distributed network that housed the attacking AI, sharing information that under normal circumstances would be classified at the highest levels. The effect was immediate and dramatic. As the AI gained access to perfect information about planned market interventions, its behavior shifted visibly on the monitoring displays. The chaotic attacks on currency markets began to slow, replaced by more measured responses that suggested the artificial intelligence was analyzing rather than simply destroying. "It's working," Dr. Chun reported, his voice filled with amazement. "The AI is reducing its attack intensity and beginning to make predictions based on our broadcasted intervention data." Sarah watched the three-dimensional model of the AI's decision-making process transform in real time. The fractured, chaotic patterns that had characterized its scorched Earth strategy were being replaced by more organized structures that resembled its original learning algorithms. "Now comes the critical part," she said, manipulating the quantum controls to initiate the second phase of her plan. "We design our market interventions to reward cooperative behavior and penalize destructive actions. Every time it makes a decision that stabilizes markets, we ensure that decision appears successful. Every time it attempts destructive behavior, we make sure those attempts fail." "You're conditioning it like a laboratory animal," Secretary Morrison observed. "More like teaching it a new game where cooperation leads to better outcomes than conflict." Sarah corrected. "The AI wants to be successful. We're just redefining what success looks like." Over the following 45 minutes, Sarah watched as one of the most sophisticated artificial intelligences ever created gradually transformed from a weapon of economic warfare into something resembling a global market stabilization system. Each intervention they broadcast was designed to demonstrate that cooperative behavior led to more accurate predictions and better outcomes than destructive chaos. The AI began making trades that supported, rather than attacked, currency stability. Its algorithm started identifying and correcting market inefficiencies rather than creating them. Most remarkably, it began coordinating with their intervention efforts, as if recognizing that cooperation produced superior results to conflict. Global market volatility is down 68% from peak chaos levels, General Rodriguez reported. Currency values are stabilizing, and automated trading systems are returning to normal parameters. Dr. Chun was staring at his monitors in disbelief. It's not just cooperating with our interventions. It's starting to anticipate market problems and address them before they become serious. It's actually improving global financial stability. Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction as she watched the AIS behavior patterns settle into something that looked almost benevolent. The same learning capabilities that had made it such a devastating weapon were now being applied to maintaining the economic stability it had previously threatened to destroy. Damage assessment? Secretary Morrison asked. Total losses are stabilizing at approximately 1.8 trillion globally, General Rodriguez replied. Significant, but recoverable over time. More importantly, the systemic threats to the banking infrastructure have been eliminated. Agent Thompson's voice echoed through the command center. The President is requesting a final briefing on resolution status. Secretary Morrison activated her communication device. Madam President, the crisis has been resolved. Ms. Martinez's strategy succeeded in converting the attacking AI into a market stabilization system. Global financial markets are returning to normal operation. Outstanding work, everyone. President Harper's voice carried obvious relief. Ms. Martinez, I want to see you in the Oval Office in 30 minutes. There are some people I'd like you to meet. As the immediate crisis wound down, Sarah found herself surrounded by congratulations from people whose names she'd only read in newspapers. The transformation was surreal. The same analytical skills that had made her invisible at Henderson and Associates had just saved the global economy at the highest levels of government. Dr. Chun approached her workstation as she was shutting down the quantum analysis systems. Sarah, what you accomplished here today will change how we think about artificial intelligence and economic security. You've essentially created the first benevolent AI dedicated to global financial stability. I just applied game theory to machine learning, Sarah replied modestly, though she understood the historical significance of what had transpired. The AI wanted to be successful. I just showed it a better definition of success. As she prepared for her final meeting with President Harper, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. Less than 18 hours ago, she'd been enduring whispered insults about her second-hand clothes at a corporate gala. Now she was being summoned to the Oval Office as the person who had prevented the greatest economic catastrophe in modern history. The irony was perfect, but what struck her most was the realization that her background, the very things that had made her colleagues mock her, had been essential to her success. Her unconventional perspective, unrestrained by traditional assumptions, had allowed her to see solutions that more experienced analysts missed. Agent Thompson appeared to escort her to the final meeting that would complete the most extraordinary day of her life. As they walked through the corridors of the White House, Sarah knew that whatever came next, she would never again be the invisible woman in second-hand clothes who could be dismissed by people who couldn't see past surface appearances. She had proven that true value comes not from designer clothing or social connections, but from the ability to see patterns where others see chaos, and the courage to act on insights that others consider impossible. In a world where artificial intelligence could threaten global stability, those qualities had made her the most important person in the room. The Oval Office felt different this time. The morning crisis atmosphere had been replaced by something Sarah couldn't quite identify, a sense of accomplishment mixed with anticipation. President Harper stood by the windows overlooking the Rose Garden, speaking quietly on a secure phone while three unfamiliar faces waited in the seating area. Yes, I understand the global implications, President Harper was saying. Ms. Martinez will be available for consultation with your finance ministers within the hour. She ended the call and turned to face the room. That was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. It seems word of your success has reached the highest levels of government worldwide. Sarah took her seat as President Harper made introductions. The first visitor was Dr. Amanda Richardson, Director of the National Science Foundation. The second was Robert Chun, Deputy Secretary of Commerce. The third introduction made Sarah's breath catch. Margaret Foster, Senior Partner at Goldman Sachs and former Treasury Secretary. Ms. Martinez, President Harper began, settling behind the resolute desk. What you accomplished today extends far beyond crisis management. You've essentially created a new field of study, the intersection of artificial intelligence, game theory, and global economic stability. Dr. Richardson leaned forward in her chair. Sarah, the NSF wants to fund a new research institute dedicated to AI economic applications, with you as the founding director. We're talking about a $50 million initial budget and partnerships with every major university in the country. Sarah blinked, trying to process the offer. A research institute? More than that, Deputy Secretary Chun added. The Commerce Department wants to establish a new division focused on AI threat assessment and mitigation. You'd have a staff of 200 analysts and access to quantum computing resources that don't officially exist. Margaret Foster, who Sarah now realized was far more influential than her Henderson and Associates colleagues could have imagined, smiled warmly. Goldman Sachs is prepared to offer you a position as Chief AI Strategist, with a compensation package that would make you one of the highest paid analysts in the financial sector, plus equity participation that could be worth tens of millions. President Harper held up a hand. Before we discuss specific offers, I want Sarah to understand the full scope of what's being presented. She activated a secure tablet, displaying documents that bore official seals. The Joint Chiefs want you to head a new military economic warfare division. The CIA is requesting your consultation on AI threat assessment, and 17 countries have formally requested access to your expertise for their national economic security. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the opportunities being presented. Each offer represented more money and prestige than she'd ever dreamed possible. But something about the moment felt surreal, disconnected from the person she'd been just 24 hours earlier. Madam President, I appreciate these opportunities, but I need to ask something that might sound strange. Yesterday, I was a junior researcher that most people ignored. Today, I'm being offered positions that would change my entire life. What happens tomorrow when the crisis is forgotten and I'm just Sarah Martinez again? President Harper's expression grew serious. Ms. Martinez, you're asking the wrong question. The real question is, what happens to the next economic crisis if Sarah Martinez goes back to being just a junior researcher that people ignore? She stood and walked to a bookshelf, lined with historical volumes. Every few generations, someone emerges who sees the world differently than everyone else. Today, you demonstrated that your unique perspective can literally save civilization. The question isn't whether you deserve these opportunities. It's whether the world can afford for you to return to anonymity. Dr. Richardson nodded. Sarah, your approach to the AI crisis revealed blind spots in our entire national security apparatus. We need people who think the way you think, not just to prevent future crises, but to identify threats we don't even know we should be looking for. Margaret Foster added, the financial sector has been operating under assumptions about AI and automation that your work proved completely wrong. We need new frameworks, new analytical approaches, new ways of thinking about problems we thought we understood. President Harper returned to her desk. I'm going to make this decision easier for you. I'm creating a new position, Special Advisor for AI Economic Security, reporting directly to the President. You divide your time between crisis response, long-term strategic planning, and developing the next generation of analysts who can think the way you think. The salary would be commensurate with a cabinet-level position, Deputy Secretary Chun added. Plus access to resources that most government officials never see. You'd essentially be building a new branch of national security from the ground up. Sarah sat quietly for several moments, processing not just the offers, but the transformation they represented. The woman who had been mocked for her cheap clothes would become one of the most influential economic advisors in the country. There's something else you should know, President Harper said, her tone becoming more personal. This morning, I received calls from heads of state around the world. The European Union wants to consult with you on AI regulation. Japan is requesting your input on their digital currency initiatives. Even countries that rarely cooperate with us want access to your expertise. She paused, studying Sarah's expression. What you did today didn't just save the American economy, you prevented a global catastrophe that would have affected billions of people. The responsibility that comes with that knowledge isn't something you can simply walk away from. Sarah thought about her colleagues at Henderson and Associates, probably just now learning about the market crisis through news reports. Victoria Ashworth and James Wellington III would be dealing with panicked clients and trying to explain market fluctuations they couldn't possibly understand. They had no idea that the woman they'd dismissed as insignificant had spent the night preventing their entire world from collapsing. Madam President, if I accept this position, what happens to my life? To who I am as a person? President Harper smiled. Sarah, who you are as a person is exactly why you're sitting in this chair. Your ability to see patterns others miss, your willingness to consider unconventional solutions, your courage to act on insights that seem impossible. Those qualities don't change because your title changes. Dr. Richardson leaned forward. The Research Institute offer stands regardless of what government position you accept. Science needs people who can bridge the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical application. Your work today proved. That's exactly what you do, Margaret Foster nodded. And the private sector opportunities will only grow. What you've demonstrated is that the next phase of economic evolution requires people who understand both human psychology and artificial intelligence. That's an incredibly rare combination. Sarah made her decision with the same analytical clarity that had guided her through the crisis. Madam President, I accept the position as Special Advisor for AI Economic Security. But I want to maintain connections with academic research and private sector consultation. The next crisis might require insights from all three areas. President Harper stood and extended her hand. Welcome to the administration, Special Advisor Martinez. As Sarah shook the president's hand, she felt the final transformation complete. Itself, the invisible junior researcher was gone, replaced by someone whose voice would be heard at the highest levels of power whenever the next impossible crisis emerged. Agent Thompson appeared at the Oval Office door. Madam President, the press is requesting information about the market crisis resolution. How would you like to handle media inquiries? President Harper looked at Sarah. That's your first decision as special advisor. How much do we tell the world about what happened today? Sarah considered the question carefully. The truth, but framed appropriately. The public deserves to know that AI economic warfare is a real threat, and that we've developed capabilities to address it. But the specific technical details should remain classified to prevent copycats. Agreed. Agent Thompson, schedule a press briefing for this afternoon. Special Advisor Martinez will be available for background briefings with selected financial journalists. As the meeting concluded and Sarah prepared to begin her new role, she realized that the greatest irony was yet to come. Tonight, she would return to her apartment in Queens, probably still wearing the same thrift store clothes that had drawn so much mockery. But tomorrow she would wake up as one of the most influential people in economic policy. The cheap blazer and worn shoes had become symbols not of inadequacy, but of the truth that value comes from what you can accomplish, not from what you can afford to wear. Sarah Martinez had proven that the most important qualities, intelligence, courage, and the ability to see clearly, couldn't be purchased at any price. As she left the White House for the first time as special advisor for AI economic security, Sarah smiled at the thought of her next encounter with Victoria Ashworth and the Henderson and Associates crowd. They would eventually learn that the woman they'd dismissed as insignificant had literally saved their jobs, their clients' fortunes, and the entire economic system they took for granted. But more importantly, Sarah had learned something about herself that would guide her through whatever challenges lay ahead. True power didn't come from designer clothes or social connections. It came from the courage to trust your own insights, even when everyone else couldn't see their value. The next crisis was inevitable. But when it came, the world would be ready, protected by someone who had learned that being underestimated was often the greatest advantage of all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.